Welcome to The State of Us. Real people with honest opinions and the future of responsible media. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
The speed and extent of current global warming exceeds any similar event in the past 2,000 years. You heard right. It exceeds any similar event in the past 2,000 years. 100 of the world's top climate scientists find that almost 3/4 of the Earth's ice-free surfaces have been paved, plowed, or deforested. That's according to two separate articles, one from BBC News and the other one from CNN News. We're going to be looking at both today and how they relate, but why does any of that actually matter to you? Well, to drive it home, aside from the crazy place that we are in history, this once in a 2,000-year time period where we've had something like this, veteran scientists are pointing to projections that the number of days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit in a place like Des Moines, Iowa, could jump from 17 days, Lance, right now, above 90 degrees, to more than 70 days above 90 degrees by mid-century. The window for us to do something about climate change is closing. And today we're going to look at it from the perspective of farmers. Because, according to several new scientific reports, some scientists are saying that farmers could grow their way out of the climate crisis. What does all that mean? Well, we'll get into it. Of course, farmers affect the food supply and the global economy, so ultra important to you. But of course, we can't begin this critical conversation on climate without
your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Nope, good stuff. And what I like about it is, number one, the report is getting rave reviews because it is going, well, again, people can believe whatever they want. I guess the facts don't matter, but it is proving some of the theories that the anti-climate change people have been processing, and that is that, this has gone on for different times throughout the last couple millenniums. But secondly, too, with farmers, I understand if there's 70 days in Des Moines that's over 90s, and this is what we've looked at, I mean, I know I have in the last 15, 20 years, is that growth patterns for crops are going to change. That places where we can't grow crops now because it's too cold are going to become prime locations to grow crops, and places like Middle America could become too hot to grow crops and nothing would work. So this is very big. And that's why I think it's interesting with the farm piece at what farmers are doing to try to adapt and to also slow down climate change so that they can continue to produce the food that we all need to keep 7 billion people alive.
So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, which finds that
what?
The IPCC.
Okay. All right. Got to get my acronyms in.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
Okay.
They find that growing food around the world will only get harder, Lance, as weather gets harsher and more unpredictable. Exactly what you were saying. Look at you and the scientists.
I know.
But unlike those that are in the fossil fuel sector, farmers, Lance, wouldn't have to switch careers to help save life as we know it. Since every plant, that's right, every plant, Caleb, from redwoods to soybeans, moves heat-trapping carbon dioxide out of the air and into the ground, the right amount of innovation, conservation, and financial motivation could help modern farmers keep the CO2 there, i.e. in the ground, while still making a living and feeding the world. Gene Tackle explains, and he's a veteran scientist, he points to projections that the number of days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit could jump from 17 to 70. And what he goes on to explain is that as the window is closing on mankind's ability to slow the damage with a sustainability revolution, he points out that farmers could be key allies in the crisis fight. And there seems to be a quiet agriculture revolution going on, Lance, even among conservative farmers who bristle at the words man-made global warming. According to Ray Gaesser, a Republican who ran for Iowa Secretary of Agriculture in 2018, while farming, Lance, more than 4,000 acres of row crops with his son, he says, quote, well, there's 7 billion people in the world and we're bound to have some impact. As we farm a little bit differently, as we sequester nutrients and carbon, we're doing the right thing, he says. That's what it's about. It's trying to do the right thing. We all want to do that, and it shouldn't be political.
And that's what farmers have always done. I mean, when you talk about, go all the way back in history, and when man were nomads, what the key to creating civilization has always been, the anthropologist said, farming. When people can grow their own crops, that allows you to develop a culture because you're no longer nomadic. So you can start to worry about your surroundings and build cities and roads and create governments and rules and all these other things. So farming is the key, but farmers have had to adapt continually throughout history. And, you know, we learned from the Indians, from the Native Americans, you know, the sister crops and crop rotation and different farming techniques to get the most out of the land. And after the during the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl, you know, of, gee, we can't keep plowing in straight rows all the time because the wind comes through and it takes all the topsoil off and everything else. And so we devised different ways to till and no-till and circling crops and all kinds of things. So this is just another instance in the long line of farmers to lead the way as far as taking care of an issue. And as the farmers are pointing out, we have to, because this is our livelihood. So it's very good that they're doing this and we should be grateful, but it's not uncommon for farmers to be a leader in the scientific field so that they can grow the most crops.
So Ray Gaesser says, Lance, it's explained that even though he refuses to pin all the blame for 2019's 4-inch an hour rainstorms, think about that just a second. Let that sit in.
I know.
4 inches an hour. An hour. Even though he refuses to blame 2019's 4-inch an hour rainstorms on human habits, all of it, in other words, he believes some of it is to blame, he embraces wind energy, earth-friendly cover crops, and soil conservation.
Exactly.
Now, just to be clear about whether or not humans are at least partly to blame, this statistic I cited earlier, Lance, the speed and extent of current global warming exceeds any similar event in the past 2,000 years. Mm-hmm. For the Lancites out there who are skeptics to just rando facts like that seem, how could they know that, Lance, right? Mm-hmm. How could they know that before they had a temperature gauge? How is that possible, right? Well, the science teams that came to this conclusion reconstructed, Lance, climate conditions that existed over the past 2,000 years, 2 millennia, using over 700 proxy records of temperature changes. What does that mean? Well, a proxy record includes things like tree rings, corals, and lake sediments. They determined that none of these climate events occurred on a global scale. So things like the Little Ice Age and the Roman Warm Period, some of which you may have heard about or not, these were events that were not worldwide. The medieval warm period. The thing that's different now, the paper states, quote, we find that the warmest period of the past 2 millennia, 2,000 years, occurred during the 20th century for more than 98% of the globe.
And those other things that the naysayers of global warming have always used to argue that, you know, the earth always warms up and cools down. Most of those covered at the maximum 40% of the globe. When the scientists did their studies and they checked out, you know, whether it was in the Pacific or across Europe, and there was a warming or colding period that the naysayers have always referred to, it's basically 40% of the Earth's land surface. And as they point out, this current heat wave, if you want to put it that way, is over 98%. So
it's a little more than that.
That's why I said in the opening, for me, this is what's important. They're proving what we've all been trying, those of us who believe in global warming, man-made global warming, have been trying to say. And I understand the naysayers are still going to, because there are people that, even if you present them with the facts, are going to disagree. But most of those people don't listen to our show. So that's why hopefully people can take this and read this, right? They can read this and see that this is factual evidence to support what those of us who believe in global warming have been saying.
So before we move on to the next thing, Lance, I want to take just a second. I want to loop in our producer here. His name's Caleb Spinner, and some of you know he has things to say every now and then.
Whenever I'm not introduced, because apparently when I'm introduced, I don't speak at all.
That's usually how it works. So for those of you that don't know, Caleb is our producer for the State of Us.
So following that logic, prepare for very minimal statements from me.
Oh, we're gonna extract it today.
Okay.
He is a National Honor Society and shares somewhat different, perhaps, political leanings than Lance and I do. But that said, there are things we agree on. So we're gonna turn to Caleb to find out answer to a first simple question. Do you believe, as a Gen Z National Honor Society self-proclaimed Republican, that climate change is a real crisis facing your generation, my generation, and future humans?
Yes.
Okay. What has led you to that conclusion? Oh, Lance had a heart attack. He's dead. So it was nice knowing Lance, but he's gone now.
Yeah, I don't think we'll hear from him again.
Don't scare my children. It's not real.
Just from what I've seen and from what I've felt, I can feel it's getting hotter. I've seen scientific data in science class that says it's getting hotter. And I mean, one of the things that I hold dear is facts. And if it's a fact, if it's something that can be proven, then I do not dispute it. So that's what's led me to that conclusion.
Oh, sorry. I'm laughing because he opened up a whole can of worms for us with if it can be proven, then I don't refute it. We'll save that one. I'm glad that we've got that on tape, Lance, for future situations.
I'm not going to say a word. I'll just use it later.
I will say, right, there are Republicans out there who do acknowledge that climate change is a serious issue. The thing that's upsetting to me is that this has become a political issue at all. And, the reality is that back, right, we learned, Lance, this was many months ago now, but we did an episode explaining that back in the 80s, really, scientists had figured this out, that this was going to be a serious problem. And in fact, it wasn't a partisan issue. It was mainly bipartisan. Congress was getting ready to take it on. And then for partisan reasons, it got broken into pieces and nobody ever did anything, which should be frustrating to all of us because, again, like Caleb said, it's not just anymore, right? Well, maybe this is happening. I mean, we're watching it happen in places. And the thing that's scary is it's not going to slow down. It's only going to get more severe faster. So the question has to be, what do we do about it? And I think that most farmers, especially the type that are farming on the scale of this guy, right, 4,000 acres of row crops, they're practical people. And you don't get to keep farming 4,000 acres by being an idiot. That's just not how that works. Cause
you don't get to keep farming it successfully without being an idiot.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you don't get to keep farming it very long, if you're not somewhat knowledgeable and somewhat willing to be flexible and adjust. And I think that's part of what we're seeing in this. So this guy that we're talking about, Ray Gaser, goes on to explain, Lance, that he's also agreed to support a national group called Interfaith Power and Light. Now, this group uses religion to address climate change. Mm-hmm. So we just turned Caleb on his head there real quick for a second. The Iowa chapter, of Power and Light, of Interfaith Power and Light, is led by Matt Russell. He was appointed to the Department of Agriculture committee during the Obama administration, and he operates Coyote Run Farm with his husband and 2 adopted sons. What the group does by gathering fellow farmers in a church basement and appealing to their faith, he says he's cobbled together a bipartisan coalition held together by love of God and creation. He says, quote, "I'm engaged with those who aren't skeptics, but who've never been invited into the conversation. That's the tipping point." And with that, Lance, before we break that down, speaking of being invited into conversations, what are we trying to do here? What's our mission?
Our mission?
Yeah.
Well, at TrueChat, our mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations.
Oh, okay. So invite people to this table, right, to discuss with us in an open way and ask questions and be part of the dialogue. And you can be part of the dialogue if you go to thestateofus.org, thestateofus.org. TrueChat is the company that produces The State of Us. And Lance and I have been doing this for going on 8 years now. And one of the things that is always encouraging to us is when we hear from people and they provide us a different perspective on things. And that's part of why we take time to read all this and dissect this stuff. So please be part of that. And you can do so at thestateofus.org. It's got links to our social media there, so you can engage with us via that medium. But you can also find all the different ways to listen there too. So if you want to invite other people to listen, or maybe you're listening on your computer and you want to listen on the go, it's got all the common places that podcasts are found, links right to where you need to go. So do check it out. And before we continue discussing the critical challenge the climate is posing and how farmers could grow their way out of it, we're going to take a brief moment to hear from one of our sponsors. Welcome back. BBC News says the speed and extent of current global warming exceeds any similar event in the past 2,000 years, according to recent research papers. What does that mean? Well, we've discussed it a little bit so far, and we're talking now about an interesting approach that's being taken to get farmers engaged and have a safe place to bring up this conversation on climate change. It's called Interfaith Power and Light. It's a national group that uses religion to address climate change. What was your reaction reading about this, Lance?
Well, that's what I really liked about it, is that you're taking what stereotypically are the groups that are anti-climate change, and you're using them to support the idea that climate is changing and let's come together and make some changes. I mean, it's exactly what we talk about all the time as far as a solution, is bringing groups together that you wouldn't normally think of coming together to solve the problem, which is what I like about it, because you have a faith-based group, and typically the religious right in the past have denied global warming, and all that kind of stuff. And they're coming and they're meeting in churches and discussing ways to fix this climate issue. I mean, it's fabulous. It's exactly what we talk about when you form the coalition, that when we talk about the idea that 70% of people usually agree on an answer, and we just can't overcome the two-party system or our stereotypical ideas about the other group to sit down and talk and realize that we really do have a lot of things in common and we can find a solution. So I was really excited when I read that and highlighted it and gave it to you, because it's just like, these are all the things that we talk about all the time that are actually happening. You have in the Midwest, which is typically conservative, a group of farmers who are meeting in a church and using that basis of religion to draw farmers together to find solutions to the question of global warming, so more food can be grown, so people can eat, and also farmers can stay in business without having to move to find land where they can grow crops. I mean, what's wrong with that? I mean, it's exactly the way we try to solve problems every day.
Sounds good to me.
On this show.
Yeah.
And here's, in actuality, somebody who's doing it. A group that is actually pulling people together and saying, you know what? We've got so much in common. We ought to be able to find some things that would work to curb this trend back in our favor.
So Caleb, as a self-identified Catholic, have you ever looked at, I would assume not, because I think that for most people, it's just not one of those things, they don't associate the two. Have you ever looked at needing to solve climate change through the lens of your faith?
I have not. What do
you think about this?
When I read this, it was a very interesting topic, just because it was something that if I speak for most Catholics, probably have not read about. And so it was very interesting. It's a way to get more people involved in it and making it a religious issue and saying, hey, if you're a Catholic, if you're a Christian, this matters because XYZ, your religion. It's interesting to put it into a different group and get more people involved in the issue. Now, I don't know what he's saying. Like, I don't know how he's tying it to religion, but it seems like it's a good idea from what I've read in this article.
Okay, so you've got an assignment here before
you mean
we
before
wrap
the
up.
Netflix stuff?
Well, yeah.
In addition to that?
I mean, before we're done with today's program, you have to look up Interfaith Power and Light, do a little skimming, and in a couple minutes, I'm going to ask for your synopsis here on it, your little take. On a bigger level, we've talked about this before too. Too often, when we're trying to convince people of something, we want to do it on our terms. And I think that's part of the problem with anything that we seek to address. I mean, this is pulling way back from climate change and faith and how they fit together. It's just generally speaking, a great example is locally, Lance. You and I talked a little bit about this thing going on right now called Coffee with Counsel, right? And the location that they've chosen to host this at is kind of what I think some would regard as their home turf. You know, it's a place they're comfortable at. It's a place they feel in power and they feel safe. And if you really want to reach people and encourage them to engage in a conversation with you, you have to make it as easy as possible to do that in as many ways as possible. And that's part of, sorry, a little shameless self-plug for the State of Us. Lance keeps talking about how happy he is that we have this now. But one thing you can do if you want right now while you're listening to the program is if you go to thestateofus.org, we've got this BBC and CNN news article linked there so that you can take a look at them and read for yourself. You don't have to take our word for it. You've got the ways to engage via social media. You can give us an old-fashioned phone call. The number's on the website there. You can send us an email. I mean, part of the thinking there is that there's no reason to create barriers to entry for anybody. And I think the reason that the group is probably finding success is because they're approaching it in a way of saying, we've got all these people who the only reason they're skeptics is because they don't have a safe place to ask questions and not be made to feel stupid, you know? And that's a huge problem with any issue that's not well understood. I think for a long time it was, and I think it still is to an extent, an issue that you take, for example, that gay rights has a problem with. You know, there's a lot of people who I don't think it's that they're necessarily unwilling or uninterested in being supportive. It's they're scared of, they don't want to be made fun of. They don't want to be made to look dumb because they don't understand. And there's lots of issues like that where people go to a group that they don't necessarily believe in, but they go there because it's comfortable because other people they know are there. And so this is saying we're going to go to a place that you understand. We're going to come at it from a perspective that matters to you. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, it's just, that's the way that they've decided to reach these people, and that's working. And I think, Caleb, hopefully, I know that wasn't exactly a few minutes, but hopefully it's enough time that you could pull some stuff up here on their website and give us a little more about the group.
Yeah. So on the Interfaith Power and Light's About section under Mission and History, the vision says that the IPL envisions a stable climate where humans live in right and just relationship, interconnected with a healthy, thriving world. They want to mobilize people of faith and conscience to take bold and just action on climate change. And it says below there, global warming is one of the biggest threats facing humanity today. The very existence of life that religious people are called to protect, is jeopardized by our continued dependency on fossil fuels for energy. Every major religion has a mandate to care for creation. We were given natural resources to sustain us, but we were also given the responsibility to act as good stewards and preserve life for future generations. A couple paragraphs down. As people of faith, our mission includes being advocates for vulnerable people and communities that are most heavily impacted by climate change. From air pollution to droughts to rising seas, it is poor people who will be hit first and worst by global warming. Our goal is to ensure that climate policies provide adaptation and mitigation support for communities domestically and internationally whose health and survival is at stake. We also aim to make sure that all people can participate in and benefit from the growing clean energy economy.
Powerful stuff, Lance.
That's good stuff.
That's actually a good way to tie it back to religion. I actually never thought of it from that aspect, as I said.
Well, this is one of those things that I don't want to get too far off on this, Lance, but you and I have talked a lot about it, and I know Caleb's heard some of these conversations that frustrates me with. We talk some about the difference between faith, religion, what it all means. Sometimes we overlook things that I think are critical and important components of these religions that people profess to practice and be part of that really help address some of the critical things that we're facing, or they at least, maybe they don't specifically provide a solution, but they provide a framework to understand how to approach something or why you should care about something or the ethics or morals of a situation. And I think what they highlighted there is so very true. I mean, if you do some basic cursory study of major world religions, they pretty much all include some sort of mandate to be respectful and care for creation as a whole. And obviously that would include, planet, animals, ourselves. Lots of discussion about, taking care of your own health, being mindful. And I mean, so all things that you don't even have to tie them to religion for them to be valuable, but for people who find value through religion, and that's where they find those things, it makes a lot of sense that when you claim that and you say, this is a reason that you should care, we have to quit pretending like it's not a problem. Hopefully that helps people.
Well, and also in big city neighborhoods and in small towns, the church or the church family has always been a place to meet, to discuss things, not just to have a religious ceremony, but it's always been the meeting house. It's always been, where groups would get together and discuss things because it's a common, usually in a location that draws people from the area that are interested in the topics that pertain to the area, whether it's a big city neighborhood or it's a small town environment. Churches historically have just been a place for people to meet, to discuss the problems and the issues of the day and find a solution. Besides the fact that you throw in there that, almost every religion has taking care of Mother Earth, whether you give it a gender or not, but to take care of the earth and to be respectful of others and of property and of plants and animals, like you said, but it's also the general meeting place. So it makes sense. It's kind of obvious, but we don't stop and think about it, like you said, to bring these things together and hold the meetings there. And again, commonality, right? We're so busy these days, I believe, finding the differences between ourselves and others that we forget to look for the common things that we can sit down and talk about and agree upon and find a solution for. And maybe we've talked about this before, but to me, with my brain cells all dying off and everything, but this is something that I haven't really thought about, is that one of the reasons we're so divisive is we're always looking to see how we're different than everybody else. We're not taking the time to realize how much we really are alike and how much so many of these issues that we all have are going to affect all of us or the majority of us. And we have things in common. We all want to have enough food to eat. We all want to leave the world a better place for our children. Then we got it. So there's a lot of things in common here that we have that we ought to be sitting down and saying, gee, we need to put aside our differences and work for the common goal because we do have those same common goals.
We'll end on this. According to the BBC News article, Justin Jordan strolls through his field of stunted corn stalks in Iowa. Quote, I'm looking at probably a 20 to 30% drop in yield just from the poor spring we had, he says. Normally he plants his corn in mid-April, but freakish weather kept him from waiting until mid-May, and just as the last seed was planted, it began raining. It began raining, Lance, for 2 weeks.
Yep.
He says, I'll be able to plant next year. Some of those guys, though, those fields are so damaged, they're talking 2-3 years before they're back in the fields planting again.
We see that around us. I mean, that's in Iowa, but we see it here in southwestern Ohio. We drive past fields all the time that have nothing in them.
He goes on to explain that just down the road, Jordan says that whatever reform emerges, he's all in. He's taken advantage of a government plan that pays him to devote some of his land to wild prairie, a biodiversity boost that costs a bit in the short term but increases his yields in seasons to come. Quote, I at least tried. Rather than just throw my hands in the air and say I gave up, I only have 410 acres, but I'm willing to do the best I can with what I've got. The article ends by saying, in the meantime, all he can do is wait, worry, and pray for a late frost and a better future.
There you go. And that kind of sums up farmers.
Yeah.
And their personality.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's kind of the people that they are.
Yep.
And they just get out in the fields and they do their work. And if, life kicks them down, they just get up the next day and they keep at it because
they don't have much choice.
That's right. And they know from experience that in a year or two, they could have bumper crops and recoup all of their losses and stay in business.
Got to be smart and proactive, though.
As long as, and I'll just put the Debbie Downer on this, as long as we settle the trade war and they can actually sell to countries that they need to sell to.
Oh, that's a political issue, though, Lance.
I know.
But yeah,
if we solve global warming, they still have to have a place to sell their goods.
That's right. That's right. Please do, though. Right. We do want people to go to thestateofus.org, check out these articles because you can see them for yourself. We didn't get to cover everything in them, and there's some good info there. So please check them out. Not quite as in depth as our typical Wall Street Journal, New York Times pieces, but still some good info. So take a look. Lance, we've challenged people who are our avid listeners right now to invite new people to listen because that's part of how that really is. That's how we address things like this. It's part of why new groups like this come to be is because there's people having these conversations. They're talking about it. They're getting ideas. So what are the ways that they can tell people to tune in?
Well, you can listen to Spotify. You can use Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else that fine podcasts are found.
For The State of Us on TrueChat in Urbana, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
And I'm Caleb Spinner.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change.